She just wanted to help an elderly lady who had fallen on the street, but she never imagined that this small act of kindness would change the course of her life forever. The sun was blazing in the sky over New York, and the thick summer air hung over the city like a heavy blanket. The asphalt radiated heat, making the walk even more exhausting for those rushing through the crowded streets. Emily Parker moved quickly, skillfully weaving through tourists and street vendors scattered along the sidewalks. A light sweat covered her skin, and her cotton blouse clung to her body due to the humidity in the air. The clock read 8:47 a.m., and she was just minutes away from the most important interview of her life. Her heart pounded, not just from the stifling heat, but from sheer anxiety. After months of sending out resumes with no response, she had finally landed an interview at one of the biggest advertising agencies in the city. This was the chance she had been waiting for, and she couldn't afford to be late. But just as she turned the corner onto Fifth Avenue, her eyes locked onto a scene that made her heart skip a beat. An elderly woman had fallen on the sidewalk, struggling to get up. Her hands trembled, and her face was flushed from the relentless heat. People walked past her in a hurry, dodging her as if she were invisible. Emily felt a tightness in her chest. Her mind screamed at her to keep going. This interview could change her life. But her heart was telling her something else. Swallowing hard, she made a decision. She took a deep breath and ran to the elderly woman kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she asked, her voice full of concern. The woman's tired eyes met hers, filled with surprise and gratitude. "My knee, I think I twisted my ankle," she murmured, trying to move with difficulty. Emily didn't hesitate. She offered her support, helping the woman sit on a nearby bench under the shade of an awning. As she did, she pulled out her phone and dialed emergency services. Time seemed to be racing faster than ever. Every second that passed was another step toward missing her interview. But at that moment, none of that seemed to matter compared to the woman sitting in front of her. What Emily didn't know was that this choice, a simple act of kindness, was about to lead her to a completely unexpected fate. Emily Parker knew that every second counted. As she helped the woman settle onto the bench, she could feel the sweat trickling down the back of her neck, and the ticking clock echoed in her mind, a relentless reminder that time was slipping away. "Do you need anything else? Maybe some water?" she asked, scanning the area for a kiosk or anything that could help. The elderly woman smiled kindly, despite the pain evident on her face. "You've already done more than most people would, dear. I just need to wait for the ambulance." Emily hesitated. If she left now, she might still have a chance, a small one, but real, to make it to her interview on time. But what if something worse happened to the woman? What if she passed out there, alone, under that scorching sun? She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision. "I'll wait with you." The woman's face lit up with surprise. "Are you sure, my dear? I don't want to keep you from anything important." Emily forced a smile, pushing down the growing tightness in her chest. Some things are more important. As they waited, Emily struck up a conversation to take the woman's mind off the pain. She learned that her name was Margaret Thompson, a former literature teacher who had dedicated her life to teaching and writing. A widow for many years, she lived alone and made it a point to walk to the corner cafe every morning, where she would read the newspaper and watch the city go by. "But today, the city decided to knock me down before I even got to my coffee," Margaret joked, laughing at herself. Emily laughed too, but she felt a lump in her throat. How could someone like this woman, full of stories and wisdom, be ignored by so many? When the ambulance finally arrived, Emily felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The clock now read 9:12 a.m. Her interview was officially lost. As the paramedics checked Margaret over, the elderly woman held Emily's hand firmly. "You are a very special young woman. The world needs more people like you." Emily smiled, but her mind was already processing the consequences of what she had just done. Had she made the wrong choice? Had she just thrown away her one shot at finally landing a job in the field of her dreams? She didn't know. All she knew was that, in that moment, she had no regrets. Taking a deep breath, she watched as the paramedics helped Margaret into the ambulance. And then, her phone vibrated. Her heart pounded as she pulled the device from her pocket, and her breath caught when she saw the name of the recruiter from the agency flashing on the screen. Swallowing hard, she answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was serious. "Miss Parker, you had an interview scheduled for 9 a.m. Can we know the reason for your delay?" Emily closed her eyes for a second, bracing herself for what was coming next. "Yes, I know I'm late, but something happened that I couldn't ignore." The silence on the other end of the line made her heart race. She bit her lip, feeling a lump form in her throat. How could she explain this without sounding careless or irresponsible? "Miss Parker?" The firm voice of the recruiter snapped her back to reality. Emily took a deep breath and decided to be honest. "I know my lateness might seem like a lack of commitment, but the truth is, on my way to the interview, I found an elderly woman who had fallen on the sidewalk. No one stopped to help her, and she was clearly hurt. I couldn't just walk away. So I stayed with her until the ambulance arrived." Silence again. Emily shut her eyes, waiting for the final blow. "We're sorry. We can't proceed with your application," or any other phrase that would crush her last hope of getting the job. But the response was different from what she expected. "You stayed with her until the ambulance got there?" "Yes," she answered hesitantly. "I couldn't leave her alone." There was a pause, and then the recruiter's voice came back, softer this time. "That's unusual." Emily frowned, unsure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. "I know responsibility and punctuality are essential, and I understand if this affects my candidacy. But I don't regret what I did." Another silence. Then, the faint sound of typing on a keyboard. "Are you still near our building?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, I'm just a few blocks away." "Great. We can fit you in for a new interview at 10 a.m., but I need you to be here on time." Her eyes widened. "Really? That's still possible?" "Yes. The agency's director, Mr. Reynolds, is curious to meet you." "The director?" she repeated, stunned. "Yes, get here on time and we'll talk." Emily could hardly believe what she was hearing. Thank you so much. I'm on my way right now." She hung up and let out a long breath, a wave of relief mixed with adrenaline washing over her. Her interview wasn't lost. If anything, it now seemed even more important. With her heart pounding, she adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and started walking toward the agency's building. She didn't know exactly what awaited her, but one thing was certain. Her choice to help Margaret had not been in vain. Emily crossed the busy streets of New York with a mix of anxiety and hope. The summer heat felt less suffocating now, replaced by the surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She still couldn't believe she had been given a second chance. As she arrived at the towering building of the advertising agency, Emily took a deep breath and discreetly wiped the sweat from her forehead. She tried to compose herself before stepping inside, smoothing her blouse and checking her reflection in the glass of the revolving door. The moment she walked into the reception area, she was greeted by a poised assistant with a professional gaze and impeccable posture. "Emily Parker?" the woman asked, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Yes, that's me. Right this way, please. Mr. Reynolds wants to speak with you before the interview." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The agency's director wanted to see her? Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Following the assistant through the sleek, minimalist hallways, she tried to steady her breathing. Her mind was racing with questions. Why did the director himself want to meet her? Was this just protocol before the interview, or had her story left some kind of unexpected impression? The assistant stopped in front of a glass door and gestured lightly for her to go in. "You may enter. He's expecting you." Emily swallowed hard, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and stepped inside. The office was spacious, bathed in natural light streaming through the massive windows. The man behind the desk lifted his gaze the moment she entered. He was tall, with graying hair and sharp eyes. He exuded authority, yet he didn't seem intimidating. "Miss Parker," he said, closing the folder he had been reading. "Please, have a seat." Emily obeyed, trying to maintain a firm posture despite the nervous energy coursing through her. "I'm James Reynolds, the agency's director," he continued. "My recruiter informed me about your reason for being late." Emily felt her heart pound against her ribcage. "I know it wasn't an ideal situation, sir, but I couldn't just ignore that woman." Reynolds studied her for a moment, his fingers lightly tapping against the desk. "Most people would have walked right past," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Not only did you stop to help, but you stayed with her until the very end." Emily hesitated, unsure of what to say. Then, the director gave a small, knowing smile and leaned back in his chair. "That's the kind of person we want in this agency." Emily's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" "Creativity and technical skills can be taught," Reynolds said, "but character, empathy, and work ethic come from within. We need people who can see the world beyond themselves." She blinked a few times, trying to process his words. "So, does this mean I still have a chance?" Reynolds' smile grew. "It means your interview starts now." A wave of relief and excitement surged through Emily. She had made it here in the most unexpected way possible, and now she had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in front of her. Adjusting herself in the chair, she took a deep breath and prepared herself. This was her moment to prove that she wasn't just qualified for the job. She had much more to offer than just an impressive resume. Emily felt adrenaline pulse through her veins. What was supposed to be a routine interview had turned into something far bigger. Sitting across from the agency's director, she knew this moment had the power to change her life. James Reynolds picked up a pen and began flipping through a document on his desk. "Your resume is impressive, Miss Parker. Strong academic background, interesting experience. But what intrigues me is that you didn't hesitate to risk this opportunity for an elderly woman who had fallen in the street." Emily licked her lips, choosing her words carefully before responding. "It wasn't an easy choice, sir. I had to act fast. And in the end, I knew that if I had just walked away, I would have regretted it for the rest of the day." Reynolds studied her for a moment, then gave a slight smile. "Well, I want to know more about you. What motivated you to enter the world of advertising?" Emily took a deep breath and smiled, finally diving into something she truly knew how to talk about: her passion. "Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated by how brands tell stories. I'd watch commercials and wouldn't just see the product. I'd focus on how those campaigns stirred people's emotions. When I got into college, I realized I wanted to be a part of that world. I want to create campaigns that don't just sell, but truly connect with people." The director nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. "And what are some of the campaigns that have impacted you the most over the years?" Emily leaned forward slightly, her excitement bubbling over. "I always think of Dove's Real Beauty campaign. The way they shifted public perception about self-esteem and beauty standards was brilliant. I also love Nike's campaigns because they always tell stories of perseverance that make us believe anything is possible." Reynolds smiled, intertwining his fingers on the desk. "I like the way you think. Advertising isn't just about selling something. It's about creating a connection." A warmth spread through Emily's chest. He was listening. More than that, he seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. The director then leaned back in his chair, meeting her gaze. "Let's say I give you a challenge right now. Imagine you have to create a campaign for a new sneaker brand. The unique selling point is that it's made from recycled materials, targeting a young, eco-conscious audience. How would you structure this campaign?" Emily took a deep breath, her brain already firing on all cylinders. "First, I'd build an emotional campaign that doesn't just highlight the product, but emphasizes its impact on the world. I'd use powerful visuals to show how small choices can create big changes. Maybe tell the story of an ordinary young person who, by choosing a simple pair of sneakers, ends up contributing to something much bigger." The director smiled, nodding slightly. "Interesting. And how would you make sure that message reaches the right audience?" "I believe social media and partnerships with sustainable influencers would be key. This audience connects with authenticity, so I'd ensure the communication feels organic, based on real experiences rather than traditional advertising." Reynolds tapped his pen against the desk, deep in thought. Then suddenly, he let out a light chuckle. "You've got talent, Emily." A wave of hope surged through her. "Thank you, sir. But the interview isn't over yet. I still have a few more questions." Emily smiled, ready for the challenge. She didn't know exactly how this would end, but one thing was certain. She was finally getting the chance to show who she really was. For a moment, the room fell silent. Emily could feel the weight of James Reynolds' assessing gaze, as if he was measuring every word she had spoken. He flipped through her resume one more time before setting his pen down on the desk. "You know, Emily," he began, interlocking his fingers, Every candidate I've interviewed so far has had an impressive resume. Sharp technical skills, years of experience, top-tier certifications. But they're all missing something. Emily furrowed her brow slightly. And what exactly is that something, sir? The director gave a slight smirk. Purpose. A chill ran down her spine. Advertising isn't just about selling products, as you yourself said. It's about creating connections, telling stories, and evoking emotions. And above all, it's about values. Before you even stepped into this office, you showed that you have strong values. And that makes me want to understand more about you. Emily wasn't sure if this was a good thing or a bad thing. So, you want to know more about me beyond my resume? Reynolds nodded. Exactly. Tell me about a moment in your life when you had to make a difficult decision. Emily took a deep breath. Her mind traveled back in time. She could pick from several situations: challenges in college, financial struggles, moments of professional uncertainty. But deep down, she knew exactly which moment to share. A few years ago, my dad became seriously ill. I was in university and had an internship that could open a lot of doors for me in the advertising world. But my mom needed help taking care of him. Reynolds remained silent, listening intently. I could have stayed at my internship and let my mom handle everything on her own, but I just couldn't. I quit, went back home, and spent months helping take care of him. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made because I knew I was giving up a big opportunity. And do you regret it? The director asked, leaning slightly forward. Emily shook her head firmly. Not at all. My dad got better, and I know I would have never forgiven myself if I had prioritized my career at that moment. I knew I could chase new opportunities later, but I wouldn't have had a second chance to be there for him when he needed me the most. The director remained silent for a few seconds. Then he let out a light sigh and smiled. You know, Emily, I would never hire someone just because they have an impressive resume. I hire people who show true character because I know the rest can be taught. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. So, does that mean I'm still in the running? Reynolds let out a small chuckle. You're far beyond just in the running, Miss Parker. A weight lifted from Emily's shoulders. But before she could celebrate, Reynolds grabbed his phone and quickly dialed a number. I'm going to have someone come in. I want you to meet a very special person. She blinked, confused. Who? He smiled but didn't answer. He simply waited. A few minutes later, the office door opened, and Emily froze when she saw who was standing there. It was Margaret, the elderly woman she had helped that morning. Emily immediately stood up, stunned. Margaret? What are you doing here? The older woman smiled warmly, leaning slightly on a cane. My dear, I don't think you realize who I am yet, do you? Emily looked at Reynolds, still struggling to piece everything together. The director smirked. Margaret Thompson is my mother. Emily was completely speechless. You helped my mother today, without knowing who she was, without expecting anything in return. That says a lot about you. Emily brought a hand to her mouth, shocked. Margaret slowly walked toward her and took her hands in hers. You're a special young woman, dear. And I made sure to come here myself to tell my son that he cannot let you slip away. Emily felt her eyes well up with tears. That day, which had started in such a chaotic way, was about to become one of the most important days of her life. Her legs felt weak for a moment. She looked at Margaret, then at James Reynolds, still trying to process everything that was happening. Your mother? She repeated, still in disbelief. The director smiled, crossing his arms. Yes, and that's why, the moment I heard your reason for being late, I asked for your interview to be rescheduled. I wanted to meet the person who, without knowing who Margaret was, chose to help rather than walk away. Emily felt her heart race. Margaret squeezed her hand gently. Dear, I raised my son to recognize good people when he sees them, and I know you are one of them. A warmth spread through Emily's chest, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Everything could have been so different if she had simply walked past that morning. James Reynolds cleared his throat and leaned slightly over the desk. Emily, here at the agency, we look for talent. People with technical skills, yes, but also those who understand the importance of human connection. I want someone on my team who sees beyond the numbers, who understands the impact of a great campaign, and who has a sense of purpose. Emily held her breath, her heart pounding. Are you saying that? The director smiled. I'm saying you're hired. A shiver ran down Emily's spine. I got the job? Margaret chuckled softly beside her, while Reynolds simply nodded. Yes. Unless, of course, you don't want it. She shook her head immediately. Of course I want it. Oh my God, thank you so much. Relief and excitement washed over her all at once. All the nervousness, all the stress from thinking she had lost her interview that morning now felt like insignificant details compared to what had just happened. James Reynolds stood up and extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Miss Parker. She shook his hand firmly, feeling as though she was living one of those life-changing moments. Margaret smiled and gently touched her arm. I knew today would be special. I just didn't realize it would be this special. Emily laughed, still trying to contain the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Life, she thought, has a funny way of leading us exactly where we need to be. The next morning, Emily Parker woke up with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. The summer heat had already settled over the city as she left her small apartment and made her way to the advertising agency. This time, however, her rush wasn't driven by fear of losing an opportunity, but by the excitement of embracing a brand new beginning. As she stepped into the towering glass building, a flutter of nerves hit her. It was real now. She had landed her dream job, and the responsibility that came with it made her eager to give her absolute best from day one. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. Good morning, Miss Parker. Mr. Reynolds asked you to stop by his office before heading to your team. Emily nodded, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Thank you. She took the elevator up, and once she reached the director's office, gave a light knock on the door. Come in, James Reynolds's firm voice called from the other side. Emily stepped inside and was met with a professional yet welcoming smile. Margaret, sitting in a plush chair nearby, beamed at her. Emily, so glad you're here, Margaret said, looking radiant. James gestured toward a chair. Before we introduce you to your team, I want to talk to you about something that might interest you. Emily furrowed her brow, intrigued. I'm listening. James crossed his arms over the desk. After our conversation yesterday, I kept thinking about your perspective on advertising, about how you believe campaigns can truly impact lives. It reminded me of a project my mother suggested a while ago, one we never got around to launching. Margaret smiled proudly. A campaign focused on highlighting acts of kindness and real stories of empathy, she explained. In a fast-paced world where people barely look at each other, we want to create something that inspires kindness. Emily's eyes widened. That sounds incredible. James nodded. I want you to be part of this project from the very beginning. It's going to be something big, and your perspective could be essential to making it work. A wave of gratitude and excitement washed over Emily. I would love to be a part of this. Margaret gently held her hand. I knew you were the right person for this. Emily smiled, feeling more motivated than ever. She didn't know exactly what the future had in store, but one thing was certain. Her small act of kindness that morning had changed her life forever. And now it was her turn to pay forward the impact that a simple good deed could have on the world. Emily felt like she was living a dream. As she walked through the agency's hallways, being introduced to the team she'd be working with, a new energy surged within her. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could not only change her life, but also give her a greater purpose within the world of advertising. The team that welcomed her was made up of experienced and innovative professionals. Her direct supervisor, Michael Turner, a sharp-eyed man with quick speech, greeted her with a smile. So, you're the famous Emily Parker, he teased, crossing his arms. I've heard a lot about you. Emily smiled, a little shyly. I hope it was something good. Michael chuckled. You've become a bit of a legend around here. The fact that you landed this job in such an unexpected way already makes us believe there's something special about you. A warmth spread through Emily's chest. Well, I promise I won't disappoint. I have no doubt about that, he said, handing her a company badge. Welcome to the team. As Emily settled into her new workspace, her excitement only grew. Her first major challenge would be contributing to James Reynolds and Margaret's special project, a campaign focused on showcasing real stories of empathy and kindness. Opening her email, she found her first assignment from Michael, an initial research task on inspiring campaigns that could serve as references. She dived into the work, scrolling through videos and case studies. The more she read and watched, the more she realized how powerful advertising could be when used for something bigger than just selling a product. Then, a thought crossed her mind. Margaret. She quickly picked up her phone and dialed the elderly woman's number, which she had saved the day before. "Hello?" Margaret's sweet voice answered on the other end. "Margaret, it's Emily." "Oh, dear, how's your first day going?" Emily smiled. "It's amazing. And I wanted to ask you something. Would you be willing to be the first real story featured in this campaign?" There was a brief silence before Margaret let out a soft, warm laugh. "My dear, I would be honored." Emily's smile widened. The days flew by as Emily poured herself into the new project. She had never worked on something that made her feel this passionate. Each story she found, every detail she helped shape, reinforced her belief in the power of empathy and the strength of small actions. But nothing compared to the first story they decided to tell. Margaret's. In the agency's conference room, Emily was preparing to present the campaign's concept to the entire team, including James Reynolds. The video they had produced featured soft, touching images of the city, interwoven with the real story of how Margaret had fallen on that hot summer morning, and how, in the midst of a hurried crowd, only one young woman had stopped to help her. The video ended with a powerful phrase on the screen. "Small gestures change lives. Choose to see others." As the lights in the room flickered back on, there was a moment of absolute silence. Emily scanned the faces around her, nervous. Had she managed to convey the message the right way? Then Margaret discreetly wiped away a tear and smiled. "I couldn't be prouder." James Reynolds crossed his arms and nodded, visibly satisfied. "Emily, you captured exactly what we wanted to communicate." The team erupted into applause. Emily felt her face flush, but deep down, she was beaming. More than just an advertising campaign, this was becoming a movement, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world. Later, as she walked out of the agency building, she felt the warm summer breeze brush against her face. She looked around and realized how different everything seemed. Life had given her a choice that day, and as hard as it was, she had made the right one. Now, as she watched people rushing by, she wondered how many of them might be going through difficult moments, invisible to the eyes of others. She smiled to herself. She knew that, from now on, she would never see the world the same way again. Because sometimes, a simple delay can lead us exactly where we are meant to be.